Put it simply, I grew up. I just sort of realized one day that I was capable of being romantically attracted to men as well as women. I realized I was different from how I'd even thought of myself. I'd just sort of naturally seen myself as straight. And even if I didn't think I thought of it this way, on some primal level, I'd thought of being straight as being normal. I didn't know why I thought like that. It's probably a mix of not really thinking too hard about these things at the time, combined with the vague notions and expectations our society tends to have towards people's sexuality. But one day I looked in the mirror and saw myself as not who I thought I was. I saw myself as an outsider from me, from the identity I'd assumed for myself. And then I had a few difficult conversations with troublesome people about those feelings. I'd always experienced homophobia. I was an effeminate boy growing up, but I hadn't really cared, because at the time I'd not really accepted it as an insult, or seen anything wrong with being called gay by losers in high school who had just as much growing up to do as I did. But when I actually was one of those people and knew it, all of a sudden it was a real judgment of who I actually was. To them, I'd actually become lesser. Being told I was going to die of AIDS and that my feelings were unnatural and so on, and having to deal with being actually expected to try to convince people that I wasn't inferior to them, suddenly made me think about that Cthulhu film I'd seen a few years before. It was like it knew what I was going through. It knew how it felt to sit in a room you just can't leave and have a piece of your personhood interrogated. It knew how it felt to be seen as an outsider, and it knew how it felt to connect with someone who understands and accepts you. Somehow, it knew me and how I'd felt before I'd ever had a chance to. Some of the scenes from this film just kept coming back up in my mind. It hadn't been what I'd thought I'd wanted, but what it was struck a chord with me anyway, on a level I didn't know was there. It just took a while for me to hear the chiming. It turns out that some of the greatest horrors, biggest sources of sadness in our lives, don't come from scope or big questions, but from the tiniest things. If you've ever lost a loved one and had to be involved with the arrangements of their funeral, or if you've ever had to be around someone you'd made an effort to cut out of your life because of something abusive they'd done to you, or even something as simple as being reminded, gently, that you're in a place where everyone regards you with suspicion, that you're an outsider to them, you'll already know that the idea of a powerful cosmic monster out there somewhere beneath the sea can actually be the least of a person's problems. The film was, in retrospect, a meaningful and valuable work that paid respect to the source material's themes and emotions in ways I hadn't grasped as a cynical kid who thought he knew he was straight and thought he knew what made Lovecraft good. And I just wasn't ready to appreciate the value of that kind of story at the time. Here's a review from back in 2009 on the film's Amazon page by someone called Giles. Giles writes,
I can't stress how bad this film is on every level. As for H.P. Lovecraft, he must be spinning in his grave, because this is definitely the worst film adaptation yet. It is vaguely based on Shadow over Innsmouth, but the story, what there is of it, is so badly constructed that you could easily miss the very few similarities.
And why all the gay subplot? What was that all about?
Now, here's the thing about Giles from 2009. I was Giles in 2009. No, I'm fairly certain I didn't write this exact Amazon review, but I felt the same way as this person at around the same time. It didn't make sense to the teenage me whose main frame of reference on the world was the horror stories he'd read. But then I grew up and it started making a lot more sense without me even having to go back and see the film again. This film and its delayed effect on me got me thinking about what works about Lovecraft stories, what doesn't, and what the best way might be to navigate these qualities in creating an adaptation. And along the way, with a lot of encouragement, and if it's not too awkward, we'll maybe talk about the fact that a writer who basically founded a subgenre of fiction, has been hugely influential and made so many people want to become writers, including myself, was really massively racist.